Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. But in college basketball, it really is, and I know I've said it a few episodes in a row, a pretty quiet time in college hoops. Talked about it before, but the NBA draft deadline is done. Transfer portal season is really done. I mean, we had a couple big late transfers. Pete Nance at North Carolina, who we'll talk about in a minute. Courtney Ramey, who I think is going to be a huge piece at Arizona. Keontae Kennedy at Memphis, maybe the final piece of what I believe will be another NCAA tournament team. Joey Baker goes to Michigan, on and on and on and on and on. But portal season is done. The draft is done. Rosters are set. And to be blunt, there's not really going to be a ton of college basketball to discuss over the next probably 2 to 3 months until we start to get to preview season as we get closer to the year. Now, something could happen. Last summer, Jalen Duren reclassified, Amani Bates reclassified. Amani Bates at some point should commit to another college here. But for the most part, it's a little bit of a slower time in college hoops. But what I'll also say is that really, since the dust settled on the NBA draft deadline, rosters get set, portal gets closed, there is one interesting topic to me that I have seen pop up here over the last couple weeks that I do think is worth discussing on this show. And listen, anytime we're going to have something college basketball related, we're going to hit on it. And it is one simple question that seems to be effervescent and pervasive in the media. How about those big SAT words right there? Effervescent and pervasive. The point I'm trying to make is a lot of people are talking about it, okay? And the topic is this. Now that rosters are set, now that we know what 2022-2023 is going to look like, first of all, is it UNC versus Gonzaga as the definitive who is number one in college basketball? And then I think the bigger question, the more important question, the more interesting question is it one of those two in one order and a big gap between everybody else? Now, I don't believe it is, but I do believe it's an interesting conversation that many in college basketball are having, and let's get into it right now. Now, first of all, where does this idea stem from? Well, first of all, I've seen a million people talk about it over the last couple weeks, but really where it comes from is this is the time of year, especially when the NBA draft deadline hits, where everybody in the media puts out their updated top 25. I know I've just said it 2 or 3 times, but rosters are set. We know who is playing where. And so at that point, we know what everybody looks like heading into next season, and everybody kind of puts out their final top 25 heading into the following season. Well, you look at most of these top 25s, and I think people in the media talk and they kind of look to see what other people are doing, but there is one very interesting thing. It does seem like every single person has either North Carolina or Gonzaga at number 1 and the other one at number 2. Now, I don't, but for the most part, they do. Here is kind of the breakdown. I went ahead before I started this segment and looked it up, kind of looked up credible people, people that I like, people that I respect in the media, and here is what I saw. Jeff Borzello, ESPN. I don't know Jeff well. I think he is insanely talented, though. I think he's one of the best writers that covers college basketball. He has North Carolina number 1, Gonzaga number 2. Kevin Sweeney, Sports Illustrated, North Carolina number 1, Gonzaga number 2. Jeff Goodman, who I like a lot. I saw him at the Arizona-UCLA game just a few months ago. He had Gonzaga at number 1, North Carolina number 2. And then North Carolina picked up Pete Nance, the transfer from Northwestern, and he moved North Carolina back into the number 1 spot, Gonzaga number 2. Gary Parrish, I've had him on this podcast a few years ago. Don't know him well, but I really respect his college basketball knowledge. He has Gonzaga at number 1 and North Carolina at number 2. John Rothstein, another guy I've had on this podcast. Obviously respect John's knowledge. Nobody loves college basketball quite like he does. John Rothstein, you know him from CBS. You know him with all the crazy sayings. He has North Carolina number 1, Gonzaga number 2. Now, if you follow Aaron Torres, that's not exactly how I have it, but I'll get into my personal rankings in a second. So I think the first question is, do I believe that it's definitively North Carolina, Gonzaga, and everybody else? I don't, but I do understand the argument why. For North Carolina, now I'll be blunt, I'll be honest. North Carolina, since the day that Caleb Love announced his return to college, and I almost said Caleb Williams, by the way. I almost called Pete Nance Pete Davidson a few weeks ago, and I almost called Caleb Love Caleb Williams. But when Caleb Love announced his return before the first deadline to even enter the NBA draft in late April, I said North Carolina's number one and nothing's going to change it, and here's why. North Carolina, in my opinion, best fits what the archetype, the stereotype of an eventual college basketball national champion looks like. Really good 1 year, have a bunch of players who conceivably could have gone to the NBA and been drafted. They decide to come back the following year. Just think about Kansas this year. Ochai Agbaji, he really went right down to the wire on his decision at this time last year. Ends up deciding to remove his name from the draft, comes back to Kansas, ends up winning a national championship, and ends up being a lottery pick, the final pick of the lottery at number 14. Christian Brown wasn't really an NBA draft prospect last year, develops into one, third-year junior. He becomes the 21st pick in the 2022 NBA draft. Well, you look at North Carolina, and first of all, they have guys that fit that bill. I might be the only one that loves Caleb Love, no pun intended, bad pun there. I think he's a guy that, I really truly believe that if he had declared for the NBA draft, I do think that if he had gotten into workouts and he had been in front of NBA people, I think he would have been a first-round pick this year. Maybe late first round, but I think he would have been a first-round pick this year. Why is that? He's everything the modern NBA is looking for. 6'4" guard, great pedigree, McDonald's All-American, took a big leap from his freshman year to his sophomore year this year. This past season, 16 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, and as I said a few days ago when I was talking about North Carolina when they got a commitment from Pete Nance, not Pete Davidson, Pete Nance, he really blew up. Caleb Love did late in the season. 28 points against Duke in that Final Four thriller, one of the biggest shots in Carolina history. 30 points against UCLA in the Sweet 16 that elevates North Carolina to a Elite Eight where they end up beating St. Peter's. You go down the list with North Carolina. R.J. Davis, I don't know if he would have been drafted. I don't really know his deal, but 13.5 points, 3.5 assists, 37% from 3 points shooting last year. Great pedigree like Caleb Love, former McDonald's All-American. Maybe not the NBA player that you want him to be, but a really good college basketball player that is coming back next year, and maybe most importantly, Armando Bacot, who is the archetype, the definition of a guy who maybe is not built for the modern NBA. That guy's a beast in college basketball, though. 16 points, 13 rebounds per game this year. Runner-up to Alondes Williams for ACC Player of the Year. And do you remember what this guy did in the tournament? 20-22 against St. Peter's in the Elite Eight. Okay, you're sitting there saying it's St. Peter's, whatever. How about 11-21 against Duke in the Final Four to advance to the title game? 15-15 against Kansas, essentially playing on one leg. And so when you add up the fact that those guys are returning, when you add in Pete Nance, who I talked about a week ago, the transfer from Northwestern, and you factor in that they were really good down the stretch, that is why North Carolina is my number one team. And I know what everybody's going to say, and we've been over this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But people will say, oh, North Carolina just got hot over the last 2-3 weeks of the season. No, they didn't. They lost to Duke in the first game against Carolina, the first Duke-Carolina game of the season at the Dean Dome. That was way back all the way on February 25th. With that loss, they fell to 16-7 overall. They finished 29-10, which, as I've told you many times, over the final 2 months of the season, over the final 16 games of the year, they went 13-3. They beat Coach K at Cameron in his final game at Cameron Indoor. They beat Coach K in the Final Four. They beat Baylor, the defending national champions. So don't tell me that they just got hot in the NCAA tournament. They were great down the stretch. So to me, North Carolina, I actually think is a no doubt about it number one team. People will argue. People will debate. People will say, oh, they're overrated. They didn't just get hot. Stop it. First of all, over the final 2 months of the season, they went 13-3. Duke went 13-4, and Duke lost everybody. North Carolina brings everybody back. And so to me, North Carolina, I can't see the argument for North Carolina outside the top two. Gonzaga's a little bit of a different deal, though. Now, if you want to put them at number one, like some people in the media did, and one thing I don't do on this show, I don't criticize other people's opinions, because we all have opinions, myself certainly included. My entire career is opinions. But I don't mock, I don't judge other people's opinions. If you want Gonzaga number one, that's fine. And I sort of see the argument, right? First of all, you're bringing back Drew Timme, two-time All-American, probably right behind Oscar Tshiebwe, the favorite to win National Player of the Year next year. I have an idea of who I'm going to pick. It won't be either of those two guys. No disrespect to Oscar, he's awesome. No disrespect to Drew Timme, he's awesome. I got another guy who I'll mention at some point closer to the season. But on top of Drew Timme, they do return a lot. Julian Strawther, 11 points per game. He's kind of one of those players, and it's interesting, right? I was thinking about the guys like, say, a Johnny Davis this year or a Keegan Murray this year. You know those guys that were really good as college players last year or were good as college players last year and then turned into lottery picks this year? I think Julian Strawther could be that, about 6'7", shot 33% from the three-point line. I think he has a chance to be really good. Rasir Bolton, 11 points per game, 46% from the three-point line. Where I think it gets interesting for Gonzaga is this. Nolan Hickman, former Kentucky commit, was a freshman at Gonzaga last year. Now, he played behind Andrew Nembhard, who was the first pick of the second round for the Indiana Pacers in the NBA draft. So I'm not criticizing Nolan Hickman for not producing as a freshman. Like, he just didn't play a lot because he was playing behind the first pick of the second round, essentially a first-round pick. But he averaged just 5 points per game, 1.5 assists per game in 17 minutes. That guy is now the starting point guard, and you're expecting him to step in and play at a really high level next year after averaging 5 points and 1.5 assists per game, 17 minutes per game. You extrapolate that out. That's like 10 points and 3 assists per game over a 40-minute span. So he's got, I'm not saying he can't make the jump. I'm just saying it's going to require like a major jump. And then, of course, the other guy at Gonzaga that's worth noting is Hunter Salas, who, of course, was the McDonald's All-American 2 years ago, was a freshman this past year, averaged 4.5 points per game, 2 rebounds, and a half an assist per game. And so why I'm not as sold on Gonzaga. Now, I do like Drew Timme. I do think Julian Strawther is really good. But for people who have them number one or number two, and again, I don't criticize other people in the media. I'm just saying I don't see them as the second-best team in the country. I really don't, because I do think that you're expecting and requiring one of those two guards to make a huge jump. And here's the other thing. I was talking to an assistant coach in college basketball that knows Gonzaga well over the past week. Doesn't work at Gonzaga, doesn't coach in the WCC, but whatever. They said something really interesting. Not only are we expecting those guys to make a leap, but how do you find minutes for those guys with the 2 transfers that they brought in, Malachi Smith from Chattanooga and Efton Reed from LSU? Malachi Smith, really talented player. Averaged 19 points, 41% three-point shooting at Chattanooga this year, was a big piece to their NCAA tournament team, a team that, if you remember, opening round almost upset Illinois, couldn't quite pull off the upset. Efton Reed's a former McDonald's All-American. Well, I just listed 5 really marquee players that are coming back for Gonzaga. Drew Timme, Julian Strawther, Rasir Bolton, Nolan Hickman, Hunter Salas. I should add Anton Watson, who's been a key player for them for about the last 3 years. Dominic Harris, a really good guard, is coming back from injury. That's already 7. And now you're adding 2 transfers. Mark Few plays 6, maybe 7 guys a game. And so who's the odd man or men out? What does it mean for that locker room? I don't know. But the combination of asking guards to step up, transfers to fit in, you really have about 8 guys, 9 guys that think they should be playing big minutes, and they're not. And there's probably going to be 6 of them that do play big minutes. I don't see it. Now, if you want to have Gonzaga number 1 or number 2, that's fine. I just personally don't see it. And to answer the second question, is there a big gap between Carolina and Gonzaga? No. I actually think this year, more than any other, I think there's actually, if anything, I think there's a smaller gap between whoever you deem number 1 and like whoever you deem number 6 or 7. Beyond those two, like I personally have Houston at number 2 in the country, and I've talked about this before. But they, of course, make an Elite 8 this year. They're down their top 2 scorers, Marcus Sasser and Tremont Mark. Marcus Sasser declares for the NBA draft and blows people away to the point that people are projecting him as a first-round pick next year. He decides to come back. Tremont Mark is healthy. You still got the big guys down low. Houston, I know it sounds crazy. Houston's good enough to win a national championship. Creighton's the same thing as what I said about Carolina. They had guys good enough to go pro. They had guys good enough to declare. They got a kid, Arthur Kaluma, who dropped 24 points on Kansas in the NCAA tournament this year. He's coming back. He could have gone pro and probably been a second-round pick. He's another one. If you think, you go back to Johnny Davis, you go back to Keegan Murray, you go back to Jaden Ivey, and you're looking for that guy next year, Arthur Kaluma might be it. Ryan Kalkbrenner, back healthy. Talked to somebody at Creighton the other day. They're telling me that him and Ryan Nembhard, Andrew Nembhard's brother, look really good. I think Arkansas is really good. We've talked about Arkansas a million times. 6 top 100 freshmen, 3 McDonald's All-Americans, 4 or 5 impact transfers. You put that team in the tournament with NBA bodies across the board. Everybody in that starting lineup is probably going to be a minimum of 6'5", 6'6". You put them in and try to beat them. I mean, Arkansas made back-to-back Elite Eights. Now you're going to give Eric Musselman the most talented roster that he's ever had. Give me a break. Kentucky, I've talked about Kentucky all offseason. I think we are disparaging John Calipari way too much, considering he's bringing back the National Player of the Year. A bunch of really good players around them in C.J. Frederick and Antonio Reeves. Cason Wallace, I think, is really good. And a starting point guard in Severe Wheeler, who led the SEC in assists. Who am I missing? Who have I not talked about? Duke, I think, is very interesting. UCLA, I'll tell you this. UCLA is that team. You talk about what I just said. Veteran players, veteran team. How about this from UCLA? Yes, they lost Johnny Juzang. They are going to have 2 fourth-year starters in their lineup. That doesn't happen at a blue blood like UCLA. Tiger Campbell, 4th-year senior. Really a 5th-year senior, 4th-year starter at point guard. Jaime Jaquez, 4th-year starter at small forward. He was hurt throughout most of the year, just underwent surgery. He's back to 100%. Adem Bona, I'm just telling you, I've heard some things about Adem Bona. He's the most athletic big man that they've had. Amari Bailey, I really like a lot. So I bring it all up to say, just keep an eye. I guess what I'm trying to say is this. This concept that it's UNC, Gonzaga, and everybody else, I just don't buy it. I think there's about 8 or 9. 1 or 2 will fall off by the end of the year. There'll be injuries or chemistry problems or whatever. I always say it's usually about 5 to 6 teams in college basketball by the end of the season that are good enough to really compete at the highest level. But this idea that it's Carolina and Gonzaga and everybody else, I just don't buy it.